My name is Eleanor. I am 60 years old, and what I am about to confess will sound like something torn straight from a Gothic novel rather than the life of a suburban grandmother. 3 nights ago, I discovered that the mansion I had lived in for 35 years, the house where I raised my son, the house where my husband and I celebrated every holiday and anniversary, had been signed away. Not sold, not mortgaged, not donated to charity, but signed over to our housemaid. Yes, our caretaker. The woman I thought was merely hired help, the woman who dusted the shelves and served tea, suddenly appeared with a legal document declaring that this sprawling mansion now belonged to her. And the signature at the bottom, trembling and half-crooked, was unmistakably my husband's. Do you understand what that feels like? To stand in your own living room surrounded by furniture you picked with your own hands, staring at papers that announce you are no longer welcome in the place that has been your entire world? I remember my knees going weak, my fingers clawing at the leather folder as if I could shred the truth into pieces and make it disappear. I turned to my husband, but he sat in his armchair like a ghost, his eyes foggy, his body frail, as if he barely understood what he had done. And beside him stood Clara, our caretaker, the smile on her lips polished and polite, but her eyes glinting with a cruelty I had never seen before. She placed a hand on my husband's shoulder as if she owned him, as if she owned everything in the room, including me. "Don't be upset, Eleanor," she said in that falsely sweet tone. "Your husband simply wanted to secure his future, to ensure the house is taken care of. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word hit me harder than any slap across the face. Grateful that after decades of sacrifice, I was now reduced to a guest in my own home, dependent on the mercy of a servant. I wanted to scream, to rip the papers apart, but then my eyes caught something. The signature. It was shaky, broken, like it had been forced out of a hand that did not want to cooperate. My husband was sick, often slipping in and out of confusion, and in that moment a horrifying thought struck me. What if he hadn't signed willingly? What if his hand had been guided, pressured, forced? I confronted her right there, my voice breaking with fury. "You manipulated him, Clara. He would never give you this house." She tilted her head, that faint smirk growing bolder. "The law doesn't care about your feelings, Eleanor. Documents speak louder than tears." The arrogance in her words set fire to something inside me, but before I could answer, another voice joined in, and it was one I never expected. My son. He walked in from the hallway, adjusting his tie, looking at me with the calmness of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "Mom," he said, his voice cool, almost clinical, "you need to accept this. It's better this way. The house will be maintained, Dad will be taken care of, and you can downsize. It's time you stopped clinging to the past." Those words pierced deeper than the document in my hands. My son, my only child, standing with her. Not with me, not defending me, not defending the woman who carried him, fed him, protected him from every storm. No, he was defending her, the housemaid. And in that moment, a shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just her scheme. This was theirs. Together. The living room around me felt suddenly unfamiliar, hostile. The portraits on the walls, the chandelier above, the velvet curtains, all once symbols of my family's legacy, now looked like props on a stage where I had been cast as the fool. My heart raced. My mind screamed with disbelief. How long had this been going on? How deep did their betrayal run? I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock, each strike louder, heavier, as if counting down to my destruction. I asked him, my son, "Why are you doing this? Why would you betray your own mother?" He looked away for a moment, as if the weight of the question threatened to crush him, but then his jaw tightened. "Because you're weak, Mom. You can't handle Dad anymore. You can't handle the finances. You can't handle reality. Clara and I, we have a plan. You should step aside." Weak. That was the word he chose. Not loving. Not tired, not grieving. Weak. I felt as if my whole identity had been reduced to a single insult by the very life I had created. And that is when the ground beneath me seemed to vanish. I remembered something. Our security system. My husband had installed cameras years ago, mostly for insurance and peace of mind. I had never paid much attention to them, but they recorded everything. Every hallway, every corner, even the study where he kept his documents. If those cameras had been on, then maybe, just maybe, they had captured the moment of that so-called signing. That thought struck me like a blade of hope slicing through the fog of betrayal. My eyes darted toward the small red light above the hallway door, the one detail Clara and my son had overlooked. The system had been running, it had seen, it had recorded, and if it recorded, then perhaps I was not as powerless as they believed. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady, though my heart pounded against my ribs. If you're so certain of what you've done, then you won't mind me checking the footage. For the first time that evening, Clara's smile faltered. A flicker of nervousness, quickly hidden, but I saw it. My son shot her a glance. And in that brief exchange, I knew the truth. They had something to hide. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. I simply turned, clutching the papers to my chest, and walked upstairs to the master bedroom. My legs trembled with every step, but inside me a storm was rising. If those recordings showed what I suspected, then the betrayal I was facing wasn't just a stolen house. It was a crime, a conspiracy, and it involved not just a caretaker who had overstepped her bounds, but my own son, my flesh and blood. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, the questions began to pile up like weights on my chest. How long had they been plotting this? Was my husband even aware, or was he just a pawn in their game? How far would they go to silence me if I exposed them? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the family portrait on the wall. There we were, years ago, smiling on Christmas morning. My husband in his suit, my son just a teenager, myself in a red dress I had sewn with my own hands. We looked happy, whole, invincible. And now? That boy had grown into a man who looked me in the eye and called me weak, who joined forces with a servant to strip me of everything I had built. That husband, once strong and protective, was now frail, manipulated, his hand used to betray me. And me? I was left clutching the remnants of a life that had been stolen. But as I stared into the eyes of the woman in that portrait, the younger me, I felt something stir. A whisper from the past reminding me who I had been before age and sorrow weighed me down. I had been resilient. I had been fierce. I had built this life from scratch with my bare hands, my sweat, my love, and if they thought they could take it all away while I sat silently, they were mistaken. So I ask you, as you listen to my story, what would you do if the people you trusted most turned their knives against you? Would you surrender quietly? Or would you rise from the ashes of betrayal and fight for your dignity, even if it meant burning the bridge to your own blood? This is the beginning of how I discovered the truth, how I uncovered the camera footage that revealed the unthinkable, and how I prepared myself for a war not just against a scheming maid, but against my own son. And believe me when I say, the storm that was about to break would leave none of us untouched. The first sign that something was wrong came the very next morning, though at the time I told myself it was nothing more than exhaustion and paranoia. I awoke early, the house unusually quiet, and padded barefoot down the hallway toward the kitchen. My husband was still asleep, his breath shallow but steady. I thought perhaps a strong pot of coffee would help me clear the fog from my mind, but when I opened the door to the study on the way, my breath caught in my throat. The desk drawers, usually locked and meticulously organized, were ajar. Papers lay scattered like fallen leaves, contracts half pulled from their folders, envelopes torn open with reckless haste. At first, I thought my husband had gotten up in the night, rummaging in one of his episodes of confusion. But the chair was not pushed in, and on the leather armrest I could still see the faint smudge of lipstick. Not mine, not his. Clara's shade. I bent down and picked up one of the sheets from the floor. It was an old insurance policy in my husband's name, irrelevant to the house, but someone had highlighted figures in yellow, circled amounts, scribbled notes in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Whoever had gone through these files had not been searching aimlessly. They were hunting. I gathered the papers, trembling, stuffing them back into the drawers, but one document caught my attention before I could close it. A copy of the deed to our mansion, stamped and dated only a few days prior. My name had been crossed out in bold ink, my husband's signature standing alone. And beneath it, freshly typed, was another name, Clara Benson, our caretaker. I staggered back as though struck. This was not just a whisper of betrayal, it was written proof, and yet something about the signature gnawed at me. It wasn't the elegant, steady flourish I had known for decades. It was jagged, halting, uneven, the kind of line a hand draws under duress or medication. My stomach turned. I heard footsteps behind me and shoved the document back into the drawer. Clara entered, carrying a tray with my husband's morning pills. She froze when she saw me. For a second, her eyes narrowed like a predator, catching sight of prey in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then she smiled, her mask snapping back into place. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," she chirped. "Did you sleep well?" I forced a smile, though my heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it. As well as can be expected, I was just tidying the study. It seemed out of order. She set the tray down on the edge of the desk, her movements precise, controlled. Oh, that was me. Mr. Whitmore couldn't remember where his insurance papers were, so I helped him look. You know how he gets confused. The lie rolled off her tongue effortlessly, but the lipstick stain on the chair told me everything I needed. She had not been searching with him, she had been searching alone. I wanted to confront her right then, to scream that I knew she was lying, but something in her posture stopped me. She was calm, almost too calm, as if daring me to accuse her. And I realized with a chill that if she had already secured the documents, if the law was on her side, then any outburst from me would make me look hysterical, irrational. That was exactly the image she wanted to paint. The unstable wife, clinging to a house that no longer belonged to her. So I swallowed my rage and said nothing, retreating to the kitchen where I poured coffee with shaking hands. I sat at the oak table, staring at the steam rising from the cup, trying to make sense of the nightmare I had stumbled into. It was then that I remembered the cameras. I couldn't rush to them now, not with Clara watching. But the thought stayed lodged in my mind like a splinter. Somewhere in this house, proof existed. I just had to find the right moment to seize it. Later that afternoon, as the sun slanted through the living room windows, I caught another glimpse of the conspiracy tightening around me. I'd gone out to water the roses in the garden when I heard voices near the gate. Our neighbor, Mrs. Davenport, was leaning against the fence, speaking in hushed tones with someone just out of sight. I moved closer, pretending to prune a bush, and my blood ran cold when I realized she was talking to Clara. "Saw you at the courthouse," Mrs. Davenport was saying, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Looked very official, all dressed up with Mr. Whitmore beside you. I didn't even know he could still make such trips." Clara laughed lightly, the sound brittle. "Oh yes, it was just a routine matter. Paperwork for the house. He insisted we handle it personally." I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The courthouse. He had been there? No, my husband hadn't left this house in weeks, not in his condition. She was lying, but Mrs. Davenport had seen them, or thought she had. Had Clara perhaps drugged him, dragged him along, propped him up just enough to fool officials into thinking he was coherent? The image was grotesque, but horrifyingly plausible. I stepped back quickly before they noticed me, retreating into the shadows of the garden. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the watering can. If the courthouse had stamped that deed, if officials had accepted his shaky signature as legitimate, then I was already one step behind. That night, I tried to speak with my husband, to ask him if he remembered anything about going to the courthouse, about signing papers. He looked at me blankly, his eyes glassy. "The house?" he murmured. "Clara said it was for the best. She said you wanted this." The words shattered something inside me. She had not only manipulated him physically, but poisoned his mind, planting seeds of doubt so that even in his confusion, he believed I was complicit. I held his frail hand in mine, tears burning my eyes, whispering, "I would never want that, Henry, never." But he drifted back into silence, unreachable. I sat awake long after he had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling, the shadows stretching long across the room. Every tick of the clock was another second slipping away, another moment where Clara tightened her grip. My son had not come home that evening, but I knew his hand was in this too. He had spoken too smoothly, too confidently the night before. He was no innocent bystander. And then, as the moonlight streamed through the curtains, I heard it. A faint creak, the sound of a door opening somewhere down the hall. I slipped from bed, my bare feet silent on the carpet, and peered into the corridor. There, moving like a shadow, was Clara. She carried a folder under her arm, her steps quick and deliberate, heading toward the study again. My pulse raced. What was she doing at this hour? I followed at a distance, careful to stay in the dark, and watched as she entered the study, closing the door behind her. I crept closer, pressing my ear to the wood. Rustling, the sound of papers shifting, a drawer slamming softly. I wanted to burst in, to catch her red-handed, but fear rooted me in place. What if she accused me of harassment, of paranoia? What if my son sided with her, painting me as the unstable one? My reputation, my credibility could be destroyed in an instant. So instead, I retreated, heart hammering, and returned to bed, though sleep never came. I lay there staring at the shadows, realizing with dawning horror that I was trapped in a house that was no longer mine, surrounded by enemies who wore the faces of family and servants. The first round of betrayal was complete. They had the documents, they had the manipulation, they had even my husband's fragile mind under their control. But what they didn't know was that I had seen enough to start piecing the puzzle together. What they didn't know was that I would not remain silent. Still, as dawn broke and light spilled across the walls of my bedroom, I couldn't silence the question echoing in my mind. How much longer before they decided I was in the way altogether? And that, boss, is where the fear turned into certainty. They weren't just trying to steal my house, they were preparing to erase me. The second round of betrayal came wrapped not in shouting or confrontation, but in whispers and half-truths, the kind of poison that seeps into the cracks of a house and makes the walls themselves feel unsafe. It began with a phone call. I was in the kitchen one afternoon slicing apples for a pie the way I had done 1,000 times before when the landline rang. Hardly anyone used it anymore. Our friends called cell phones, and telemarketers had all but given up. When I picked it up, the line crackled with static, and then a man's voice asked for Henry, my husband. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Collins from Davenport & Associates," he said crisply. "I just wanted to confirm the appointment for tomorrow morning regarding the property transfer." My knife slipped and nicked my finger, the sting of pain dwarfed by the shock of those words. Property transfer. Appointment. Tomorrow morning. I tightened my grip on the receiver. "This is his wife," I said, forcing my voice steady. "What appointment are you talking about?" There was a pause, awkward, like he had revealed more than he intended. "Oh, I assumed you were aware. The follow-up signing for the deed. Mr. Whitmore and Ms. Benson already came in last week. This is just the formal confirmation." Ms. Benson, Clara. My stomach lurched. "He won't be attending," I snapped, slamming the phone down before he could protest. My hands trembled as blood from my small cut mingled with apple juice on the cutting board, a macabre little reminder that everything in my life was bleeding together. When I confronted Clara about it later, she didn't deny it. She simply smiled, that same infuriating, perfect smile, and said, "Your husband wanted me there. He trusts me more than anyone now." I wanted to claw the smugness from her face, but instead I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. "You tricked him," I whispered. "You dragged him into this mess." She tilted her head. "Trick or care? Maybe you should ask yourself why he doesn't lean on you anymore." Her words sliced deeper than the knife had earlier, and the worst part was, she was right about one thing. My husband no longer leaned on me, not because I had failed him, but because someone else had poisoned his trust. That evening, desperate for clarity, I invited Mrs. Davenport, the neighbor who had mentioned seeing Henry and Clara at the courthouse, for tea. She arrived in her usual floral dress, carrying a tin of cookies, her curiosity barely hidden beneath her polite small talk. "I'm worried about Henry," I told her after pouring tea, my hands still unsteady. "You said you saw him last week?" Her brows furrowed. "Yes, dear, he was with Clara. I thought it was odd, him being so frail, but they seemed determined. Clara was practically holding him up by the arm. She said it was just paperwork, nothing important. He looked confused, but he signed something. I assumed you knew." The words made my stomach twist. He had signed, under her guidance, in front of witnesses who didn't question because she looked confident and he looked too weak to object. How easy it must have been for her to parade him around like a puppet. The grieving wife, none the wiser. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "And you didn't think to tell me sooner?" Mrs. Davenport blushed, flustered. "Well, I thought it was your business. I didn't want to interfere." I bit back my anger. Of course she hadn't wanted to interfere. Neighbors always liked the thrill of gossip, but rarely the burden of action. Still, her account confirmed what I already suspected. Clara had orchestrated everything, using Henry's vulnerability to stage a performance of legitimacy. When Mrs. Davenport left, I wandered the halls of my mansion with new eyes. Every framed photograph, every antique vase, every polished floorboard felt like it had a question mark hovering above it. Was this still mine, or had it already been claimed by someone else? That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard muffled voices drifting up from the living room. I crept down the stairs and saw a sight that turned my blood to ice. My son sat with Clara on the sofa, documents spread across the coffee table between them. She pointed at lines with a pen, and he nodded gravely, as though this were a business meeting and not a plot to dismantle his own family. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments. "Liquidate assets quickly. Mother will resist. Need her out before..." Before what? Before the transfer was final? Before they could sell the mansion? Before they could erase me completely? I retreated silently, my heart hammering in my chest. They hadn't seen me, but the image burned into my mind. My son and Clara, heads bent together, united against me. The next day confirmed it further. My son approached me in the garden, where I was pruning roses with hands that shook too much to hold the shears properly. He looked almost apologetic, but his words betrayed him. "Mom," he began softly, "you have to understand. The house is too big for you. You can't manage it anymore. Dad can't either. Clara is stepping in because we need someone competent, someone who can handle things. It's not betrayal, it's practicality." Practicality. That was the justification for throwing his mother to the wolves? I stared at him, my chest heaving. Competent? She's a servant. She dusts the shelves. She brings water. And you call that competence? He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he was the one burdened by my stubbornness. "You're being emotional. Look around. This estate needs constant upkeep, repairs, management. Do you want it to fall apart just because you're too proud to accept help?" I dropped the shears, the clang against the stone path echoing in the stillness. Help? Or take over? He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything. He wasn't just complicit, he was invested. For the first time, I began to suspect there was money involved, more than just the house itself. My son had debts, whispers of failed ventures, bad investments. I had brushed them aside, thinking youth was entitled to mistakes. But what if this was his way of digging himself out, even if it meant burying me alive in the process? The walls of the house seemed to close in on me after that. I felt eyes on me constantly, Clara's smug gaze, my son's watchful one, even my husband's vacant stare that no longer recognized me as his ally. Every hallway was a trap, every conversation a test. And then came the breaking point of round 2. Late one evening, when the house was dark and quiet, I returned to the study determined to search the drawers again. I needed proof, something concrete I could hold on to before they stripped it all away. I lit a small lamp and rifled through the folders, my hands moving faster as fear mounted. That's when I found it, a second deed. Unsigned but prepared, with my name already erased. It was waiting. Just waiting for a final signature to erase me completely. As I held the paper in the lamplight, the door creaked open. I froze, caught like a thief in my own home. Clara stood there, her figure framed by the hall light, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," she said quietly, her voice smooth as silk. "This is no longer your domain." I wanted to scream, to tear the paper to shreds in front of her, but my throat tightened. Instead, I forced a smile, though my hands shook visibly. I was just tidying. Her eyes flickered to the paper in my hand. And for a brief moment, something raw and vicious broke through her facade. But then she stepped back, her voice calm. "Be careful, Eleanor. Snooping can be dangerous, especially for someone as fragile as you." The words hung in the air like a threat. And in that instant, I realized this was no longer about documents or signatures. This was about power. She wasn't just stealing my house. She was positioning herself to erase me entirely, physically if necessary. When she left, I collapsed into the chair, clutching the paper, my breath ragged. The evidence was there, but so was the danger. Every move I made from now on had to be calculated, precise, because the game had shifted from theft to survival. And the worst part? My son was no longer a bystander. He was her partner. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I could feel the shift inside me. Round 1 had been shock. Round 2 was revelation. And now I knew. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. I used to think a house could protect you, that walls held not only memories, but also loyalty. I was wrong. In round 3 of this nightmare, the mansion itself seemed to turn against me. Every room that once held laughter now echoed with suspicion. Every hallway carried whispers that stripped away my dignity bit by bit. The pressure mounted until I could hardly breathe, and the worst wounds came not from strangers, but from the very people who should have stood at my side. It started subtly, with Clara rearranging routines. She insisted on handling the mail before I could touch it, intercepting letters with the grace of someone helping me stay organized. Packages I ordered never arrived. Bills vanished. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "Oh, don't trouble yourself, Eleanor. I filed everything. You're too stressed to manage paperwork." Too stressed. That phrase became her refrain, and soon even my son began to echo it. He arrived one afternoon while I was folding laundry, and without so much as a greeting, he took the basket from my hands. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing chores anymore. Clara can handle it." "It's just laundry," I said, my voice trembling more from anger than exhaustion. He looked at me with a pity that felt like a dagger. "You're not strong enough. We don't want you to hurt yourself." We, not I, not Clara. We. They were speaking as one now, united in their quiet coup. I tried to resist, to assert myself in small ways. I cooked dinner one evening, roast chicken, Henry's favorite. But when I brought it to the table, Clara clucked her tongue. "This isn't good for his digestion, too much fat." She swept the dish away with practiced efficiency, replacing it with a bland soup she had prepared. My son nodded approvingly, as though she were the wife and I merely an intrusive guest. The humiliation cut deeper with each passing day. The staff I had once hired now looked to Clara for instructions. Gardeners asked her permission before trimming hedges. The housekeeper addressed her as Mrs. Whitmore by mistake one morning, and though she corrected him with false humility, the slip revealed the truth. In their eyes, she was already the mistress of the mansion. I felt myself shrinking, my voice silenced, my presence erased. At night, I would retreat to my bedroom and cry quietly into my pillow, careful not to let Henry hear. Not that he would have understood, his mind was drifting further each day. His trust in me replaced by Clara's constant manipulation. He began asking her questions that once he had asked me. Where are my glasses? What time is my medicine? Did we pay the electricity bill? Each answer she gave tightened her grip. Each silence from me loosened mine. The pressure intensified when financial matters arose. One morning, I went to the bank to withdraw funds for household expenses, only to be told my access had been restricted. Your husband's power of attorney was reassigned, the manager explained awkwardly. We'll need Ms. Benson's approval. I nearly collapsed at the counter. Ms. Benson, she's our caretaker, not family. The manager's eyes darted away, his discomfort obvious. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, the paperwork is in order. I left the bank with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. My son was waiting at the mansion when I returned. Mom, why did you go to the bank? He demanded, his tone sharp, rehearsed. Because it's my money, I snapped. His face hardened. Not anymore. Dad decided it was safer this way. You should focus on your health. Health. Another weaponized word. They weren't just stripping me of property. They were branding me incompetent, fragile, unfit to manage my own life. The isolation grew unbearable. Old friends stopped visiting. When I called, they gave excuses, their voices hesitant. Later, I learned Clara had been answering the phone in my absence, telling people I was too ill for company. She painted me as weak and fading, a woman whose mind was slipping just like her husband's. Even the community began to believe it. At church, whispers followed me down the aisle. One woman approached with a sympathetic smile. We've heard you're not well, Eleanor. Clara is such a blessing, isn't she? Taking over everything so you can rest. Rest. The word felt like a coffin lid closing. The breaking point came on a stormy evening when thunder rattled the windows and rain pounded against the roof. I descended the staircase, intending to check the locks, when I overheard voices in the drawing room. My son and Clara again, their conversation heated. She's resisting too much, Clara hissed. We need to accelerate. The longer she's here, the riskier it becomes. She's my mother, my son whispered back, though his voice lacked conviction. Then act like a son who cares, Clara shot back. Make her see reason, or else she'll destroy everything we've built. Everything we've built. The phrase lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. They spoke of empire and ambition while I stood unseen in the shadows, rain dripping from the hem of my nightgown. I wanted to burst in, to scream that I heard them. But instead I retreated upstairs, my body shaking violently. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps approaching my door, every gust of wind a whisper plotting my erasure. When dawn finally came, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were hollow, my cheeks sunken. Clara was right about one thing. I looked weak. But weakness was not the same as surrender. The next morning they confronted me openly. At breakfast, Clara placed a set of keys on the table. Eleanor, she said sweetly, we've found a lovely apartment downtown. smaller, easier to manage. We think you'll be more comfortable there. We again. Always we. I stared at the keys, then at my son. You want to throw me out of my own home? It's not like that, he insisted. It's for your safety. You'll thank us one day. Safety. Another lie wrapped in concern. My hands trembled, but I pushed the keys back toward them. This is my house. I will not leave. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara's eyes burned with quiet fury, but she smiled nonetheless. Very well, she said softly, but don't say we didn't try to help. The menace beneath her words chilled me. They weren't asking anymore. They were warning. That evening, as I sat alone in my bedroom, I realized just how isolated I had become. My husband was lost to me. My son had turned against me. My friends had been cut off, and the household staff no longer recognized my authority. The mansion that had once been my sanctuary had become a gilded prison, each corridor echoing with the footsteps of conspirators. And in that silence, one terrifying thought refused to leave my mind. If they had succeeded in convincing the world I was too weak, too sick, too unstable, what would stop them from making that narrative a permanent reality? One fall down the stairs, one slip in the bath, one tragic accident, and no one would question it. I pressed my palms against the cold window pane, watching lightning split the sky, and whispered to the storm outside, I will not let them erase me. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at my heart. Because right then, surrounded by betrayal, I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. The pressure had become unbearable, and though I clung to fragments of strength, I could feel myself bending, breaking. Round 3 was no longer about losing the house. It was about losing myself. And if I didn't find a way to fight back soon, I knew they would win. I thought I had already reached my lowest point, but round 4 proved that the abyss is deeper than you ever imagine until you are pushed into it. By then, the mansion no longer felt like mine. Every doorknob I touched felt foreign. Every floorboard creaked like it was complaining about my presence. I was a ghost haunting my own home, tolerated but not welcomed, endured but not respected. The storm that had shaken the house the night before seemed to linger inside me. I woke the next morning to find the locks on the study door changed. The very room where I had once balanced accounts, where Henry and I had shared evening brandy and laughter, was now off limits to me. Clara carried the new key on a chain around her neck, flaunting it with the smugness of a queen displaying her crown. Security reasons, she said when I dared to ask. We can't have important papers misplaced. Misplaced? That was her word for stolen. I tried to protest to my son, but he brushed me off with practiced patience. Mom, please, don't make this harder. The lawyers are handling everything. You don't need to burden yourself with details. Burden. Another word sharpened into a knife. That afternoon, while I was dusting the shelves in my bedroom, a small act of rebellion. Since Clara insisted the staff would handle it, I overheard voices drifting up from the foyer. My son's voice, low but urgent. She's resisting again. If she doesn't leave soon, people will start asking questions. Clara's reply was softer, but laced with venom. Then we'll have to accelerate. We can't let sentimentality ruin this. If she won't go willingly, there are other ways. Other ways. The phrase rattled in my skull like a gunshot. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow. They weren't just talking about pushing me out. They were planning something darker. That night, fear settled in my bones. I locked my bedroom door for the first time in 30 years, sitting upright in bed with a lamp burning until dawn. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps coming for me. My mind spun with images of staircases slicked with oil, cups of tea laced with poison, electrical wires frayed just enough to spark a fire. But fear was not the worst of it. Isolation was. Friends stopped calling altogether. When I reached out, my calls went straight to voicemail. Later, I discovered Clara had replaced my phone with a newer model, claiming the old one malfunctioned. The numbers I had stored for decades were gone. I was cut off, silenced. Even Henry, my anchor for so many years, had been turned into a stranger. One evening, I tried to remind him of our wedding day, the vows we had spoken under the oak tree in the garden. His eyes flickered with a moment of recognition, and I thought I had reached him. But then Clara entered with his medicine, and his gaze shifted instantly to her. "Thank you, my dear," he whispered, words that once had belonged only to me. It felt like watching my husband being buried alive while I stood helpless, the coffin lid nailed shut by the very person who claimed to be his caretaker. The breaking point came 2 nights later. It was late, nearly midnight, when I heard pounding on my door, my son's voice sharp and insistent. "Mom, open up!" I hesitated, dread coiling in my stomach. When I unlocked the door, he pushed past me, his face tight with frustration. Clara followed, arms folded, eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "This has to stop," he said. "You're making things worse for yourself. Dad can't handle your outbursts. The staff is uncomfortable. The neighbors are talking. You need to move out tonight." "Tonight?" I gasped. "Where would I even go?" Clara's smile was thin, cruel. "We've arranged a place for you, a small apartment downtown. Quiet, simple, safe. We'll drive you there now." I shook my head, panic clawing at my chest. "No, this is my home. You can't just throw me out like trash." My son's eyes hardened. "You don't have a choice anymore. You either leave with dignity, or—" He trailed off, but the unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. I looked between them, my son and the woman who had stolen everything from me. I searched his face for some trace of the boy I had raised, the boy who once clutched my hand during thunderstorms, who kissed my cheek before school, who promised me he'd always protect me. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man whose loyalty had been bought by greed and manipulation. "I won't go," I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute. Clara stepped closer, her perfume cloying, suffocating. "Then don't blame us when something unfortunate happens." With that, they turned and left, leaving the door wide open like a wound. I collapsed onto the bed, my body shaking violently. The message was clear. I was no longer safe in my own house. The next day confirmed it. At breakfast, the staff avoided my gaze, their eyes darting nervously toward Clara before answering my questions. One even refused to serve me, mumbling something about orders. I realized with chilling clarity that I had been demoted to a stranger in the home I had once ruled, and then came the ultimate humiliation. That evening, during dinner, Clara deliberately sat at the head of the table, my husband beside her, my son at her other side. When I approached, carrying my plate, she looked up with a smile. "I think you'd be more comfortable at the far end, Eleanor. Less pressure, you know." The staff froze, the air thick with tension. My son said nothing, didn't even meet my eyes. And so I walked to the far end of the table, my footsteps echoing like funeral drums. I sat alone. A queen deposed, while Clara raised her glass in a mock toast. "To family," she said, her voice dripping with irony. I barely tasted the food. My eyes blurred with tears I refused to shed in front of them, but inside something cracked, something small and vital. Later that night, I found myself standing in the garden, rain soaking my nightgown, staring at the oak tree where Henry and I had once pledged our lives to each other. The tree was old now, gnarled, but still standing strong. I leaned against its trunk, my tears mingling with the rain, and whispered to the darkness, "I can't do this anymore." It wasn't surrender, it was despair. For the first time, I truly believed they might succeed, that I might be erased, my name forgotten, my existence rewritten as that of a fragile old woman who lost her home to misfortune rather than betrayal. As I stood there, The mansion loomed behind me, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. For a moment, I imagined the house laughing at me, mocking me for ever believing I had belonged here. That night, I almost packed my bags. I almost left, willing to abandon decades of memories just to escape the suffocating grip of their conspiracy. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the faint, flickering hope that the cameras had indeed recorded the truth. Either way, I walked back inside, drenched and trembling, and locked myself in my bedroom. I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection. My face looked pale, hollow, but behind the hollow eyes burned a spark, small but alive. Round 4 was the closest I came to breaking. They had stripped me of authority, isolated me from friends, humiliated me publicly, and threatened me privately. They had pushed me to the edge of surrender. But sometimes it is at the edge that you find the resolve to fight. I pressed my hands flat on the vanity, meeting my own gaze in the mirror, and whispered, "If they want war, then war is what they'll get." The night after they tried to throw me out, I sat awake in my bedroom, the house around me silent except for the occasional groan of old wood in the wind. My heart was heavy, but in that silence, a thought returned to me like a candle flickering in the dark. The cameras. My husband had installed them years ago, long before Clara stepped into our lives. He wanted to protect the mansion, to ensure no intruder could ever breach its walls unnoticed. Those cameras had become background noise to me, little red lights blinking in corners I never paid attention to, but now I realized they had been watching everything. I rose quietly, slipping into my robe and padded down the hallway. My feet trembled on the hardwood, every step feeling like it echoed through the entire house. I half expected Clara to appear at any moment, her smile sharp as a blade, asking where I was going. But no one came. I reached the small room off the library where the security system was tucked away. It was dusty, forgotten, but the light on the main console glowed steady, recording, always recording. My fingers shook as I navigated the system. The screen flickered, images from different cameras flashing across it, the garden, the front gates, the hallways, and then the study. My breath caught as the footage played back, grainy but clear enough. There was Henry, my husband, slumped in a chair. Clara beside him, speaking quickly, her hands fluttering like a conductor guiding an orchestra. My husband's hand hovered over papers on the desk, and there was the moment. She gripped his wrist, pressing the pen into his trembling fingers, guiding his hand across the line. His eyes were glazed, unfocused, his lips barely moving as though he didn't even know where he was. And she smiled the whole time, her gaze darting occasionally toward the doorway as though checking to see if anyone was watching. I pressed a hand to my mouth, bile rising in my throat. It was worse than I imagined. He hadn't signed willingly. He had been used like a puppet. I scrolled further, heart hammering, and found another recording. My son entering the study afterward. Clara handed him the papers and he nodded, slipping them into his briefcase. Their voices were faint, but when I turned the volume up, I caught it. "She'll resist," Clara whispered. "She doesn't matter," my son replied coldly. "Once this is filed, she has nothing." I sank back into the chair, my body trembling. The betrayal I had suspected was now undeniable. Carved into pixels and stored in the belly of the very house they tried to steal. I wanted to run upstairs, to scream into my pillow, to collapse under the weight of what I had just witnessed, but instead, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had proof. The next morning, I waited until the house was quiet. Henry napping, Clara out shopping, my son at work, and I made my move. I called the only person I thought might still be on my side, Anna Reynolds, a young lawyer who had once been my student in a community class I taught years ago. She'd written to me occasionally, sending holiday cards, updates about passing the bar exam. If anyone could help me, it was her. When she answered the phone, her voice was warm but cautious. Mrs. Whitmore? It's been years. Are you all right? No, I whispered, my voice shaking. I'm not. I need your help. It's about my husband, my house, and my son. There was a pause. Then her voice grew firm. Tell me everything. I did. I told her about the papers, the courthouse, the lies, the threats. And finally, I told her about the footage. She didn't interrupt, but when I finished, her tone was sharp with conviction. You have evidence, Mrs. Whitmore. Strong evidence. Don't let them know you've seen it yet. Make copies. Keep them safe. I'll come to you tonight. Her certainty steadied me like a hand pulling me up from quicksand. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of control. That afternoon, I copied the footage onto 2 flash drives, hiding one in a jewelry box beneath old brooches, slipping the other into a hollowed-out cookbook on my kitchen shelf. Each movement felt cinematic, like I was acting in a spy film, but this wasn't fiction. This was survival. When Anna arrived after dark, she hugged me tightly, her small frame surprisingly strong. You're not alone anymore, she said softly. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once fed my family meals filled with laughter. Now it was covered in documents, printouts of the footage, and Anna's legal pad filled with furious scribbles. They coerced your husband, she said firmly. That's fraud. And your son's involvement makes it conspiracy. With this, you can challenge the deed, freeze any transfer, and expose them both. Her words were like oxygen to a drowning woman. I leaned forward, my eyes searching hers. But what if they try to hurt me? They've already threatened. She placed a hand over mine. Then you document everything. Every word, every look, every move. You're not the victim anymore, Mrs. Whitmore. You're the witness, and the witness is powerful. The shift in tone electrified me. For weeks, I had been treated like a fragile relic, a burden to be managed, a woman on the verge of collapse. But now, in Anna's eyes, I was something else, a fighter, armed with truth. That night, after she left with copies of the evidence secured in her bag, I stood in my bedroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The hollow woman from before was still there, but behind her eyes burned a spark that hadn't been extinguished after all. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had erased my voice, but the cameras had been watching, and now I had the one thing they never expected: proof that their empire was built on lies. I whispered to my reflection, my voice steadier than it had been in months. You wanted war, Clara. You wanted war, my son. Now you'll have it. The night I decided to confront Clara in private, the house felt like a stage set for tragedy. Every lamp cast long shadows across the walls. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to announce my steps like a drumbeat. I carried the flash drive in my pocket, the proof of her treachery burning against my skin. I had replayed the footage so many times that the images were seared into my mind. Her hand guiding Henry's, her smile curling like smoke as my husband's identity was stolen, stroke by stroke. I found her in the study, exactly where I knew she would be. She had made that room her throne. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting orange light across her face as she scribbled notes into a ledger. She looked up when I entered, her expression briefly startled before softening into that insufferable mask of composure. Eleanor, she said smoothly, you shouldn't be wandering around at this hour. You'll tire yourself. I closed the door behind me, the sound echoing like the final note of a hymn. I'm not tired, I replied. My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling with rage. I'm wide awake, wide enough to see exactly what you've done. Her smile faltered just for a second, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what you mean. I stepped closer, pulling the flash drive from my pocket, holding it between us like a dagger. This holds every second of your lies. The cameras didn't blink, Clara. They saw you force his hand. They heard my son plotting with you. And soon, so will a judge. Her eyes flicked to the flash drive, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear break through her mask. It was small, fleeting, but it was there. Then, just as quickly, she laughed, the sound low and mocking. "Do you think anyone will believe you? You've been walking around like a lost ghost for weeks. Everyone thinks you're frail, confused. That's the picture we've painted. Who will they trust? You or the loyal caretaker who's been holding this house together?" Her words were meant to unnerve me, but instead they ignited the fire inside me. I slammed the flash drive onto the desk, the crack of plastic against wood startling her. They'll believe what they see, and what they'll see is you, holding my husband's wrist like a puppet. They'll see my son admitting I don't matter. They'll see the truth. For the first time, her mask cracked completely. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curled back, and the venom beneath her civility poured out. "You stupid old woman. Do you think you can win? This house is already mine. Your son chose me over you. Even Henry prefers my voice to yours now. You are nothing here." I leaned forward, my face inches from hers, my voice a whisper sharp as glass. "Then why are you afraid?" The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Her hand twitched, as if she wanted to snatch the flash drive, but she didn't dare. The firelight flickered across her features, revealing the truth she could no longer hide. I had cornered her. But she wasn't done. Clara straightened, folding her arms, her eyes glittering with malice. "Be careful, Eleanor. Proof can disappear. Accidents happen. Do you really think that drive will protect you if you don't live to hand it over?" Her threat was naked now, unwrapped from false smiles. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, but I refused to back down. "Then you'd better kill me tonight," I said softly, "because tomorrow the world will know who you really are." We stood locked in silence, the flames snapping in the fireplace the only sound. It was the first true battle of wills, and though fear clawed at me, I realized something vital. She no longer controlled the narrative. I did. For the first time, she was reacting to me, not the other way around. Finally, she turned away, her voice cold. "You'll regret this." I picked up the flash drive, slipping it back into my pocket. "No, Clara, you will." I left the study without looking back, but I could feel her eyes burning into my spine, filled with the promise of vengeance. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding, but I had crossed the threshold. I was no longer the victim cowering in the shadows. I was the woman with evidence, with a plan, with fire in her blood. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, it won't be private. Tomorrow, everyone will know." The next morning, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter. I had spent the entire night rehearsing what I would do, how I would release the truth, not in whispers, but in a roar loud enough that no one, not Clara, not even my own son, could smother it. My hands still shook as I dressed, sliding the flash drive into the pocket of my coat. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something more powerful than fear: resolve. The occasion presented itself sooner than I expected. My son had invited several relatives and neighbors to the house under the pretense of discussing Henry's health and estate matters. Clara hovered around the parlor, greeting guests with her honeyed smile, her hand brushing my son's arm as if she were already his partner in everything that mattered. I sat quietly in a corner, watching, waiting. When everyone had gathered, nearly 20 people filling the parlor with murmurs of sympathy and polite interest, my son cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As you know, my father's health has been declining. In order to ensure stability, we've made some decisions regarding the house and finances. Clara has been instrumental in keeping everything organized." Heads nodded. Whispers of approval rippled through the crowd. Clara smiled modestly, but her eyes sought mine across the room, daring me to protest. I rose slowly, my heart hammering. "Before you all hear their version," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the room, "you should see the truth with your own eyes." Gasps murmured through the gathering. Clara's smile froze. My son stiffened. I pulled the small laptop from my bag. Anna had prepared it for me, loaded with the footage, and placed it on the table. With a few keystrokes, the screen flickered to life. At first, silence. Then the grainy image of Henry in the study appeared. His head drooped, his body weak. Clara beside him, pressing the pen into his hand, guiding it across the page while she smiled as though nothing were amiss. The room erupted with shocked whispers. "Is that?" "She's holding his hand. He doesn't even look conscious." I turned to the gathering, my voice breaking but strong. "This is what they call care. This is how they stole my husband's will, his house, his dignity, and my son." I pressed play again, showing the footage of him entering afterward, Clara handing him the papers. His voice rang clear even through the static. "She doesn't matter. Once this is filed, she has nothing." The parlor fell into horrified silence. My son's face went pale, then red. Clara lunged forward. "This is taken out of context," she cried, her voice shrill. "Henry wanted this. He told me." But the crowd wasn't listening to her. They were staring at me, at the proof, at the betrayal unraveling before their eyes. I stepped closer, my voice rising with every word. For weeks I've been painted as weak, as confused, as unfit. They isolated me, silenced me, humiliated me. But the truth was watching. The cameras saw everything. And now, so do you. My son finally found his voice. "Mom, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Dad needed stability." "Stability?" I cut him off, my hands trembling as I pointed at the screen. "You call this stability? Forcing a sick man to sign away his home while his wife is left in the dark? Is this what you call love? Or is it greed? Tell them, son. Tell them why you betrayed your own mother." His lips parted, but no words came. The room filled with the weight of his silence, and in that silence, Clara snapped. "This house was wasted on you," she hissed, her mask shattering completely. "You were too sentimental, too weak to manage it. Your husband trusted me, not you, and your son—" She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "He was smart enough to see where the real future was. Together, we could have had everything, but you—" She jabbed a finger at me. "You refused to die quietly." Gasps erupted again. My son's eyes widened in horror at her outburst, but the damage was done. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a confession shouted for all to hear. Neighbors exchanged looks of disgust. A relative muttered, "Unbelievable. To plot against your own blood." Someone else whispered, "Call the police." I straightened, tears streaming down my cheeks, but my voice rang clear. "You hear her. You all heard her. This was never about care. It was about power, about money, about erasing me from my own life. But I will not be erased. Not today. Not ever." Anna entered then, as if on cue, carrying a folder thick with documents. She had waited outside until the moment was right. She crossed the room, handed the folder to the nearest neighbor, and announced, "These are legal filings prepared on behalf of Mrs. Whitmore. Injunctions to freeze the property transfer. Evidence of fraud and sworn testimony ready for the court." The crowd stirred. The tide had turned completely. Clara's face drained of color. My son buried his head in his hands, and I stood taller than I had in months, my heart pounding not with fear but with vindication. Then came the final twist. One of the staff members, the butler who had served our family for 20 years, stepped forward. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "I saw them. The night they forced Mr. Whitmore to the courthouse, I drove them there under orders. He was half asleep, mumbling. I knew it wasn't right, but Clara threatened my job. I stayed silent. But no more." The room erupted again, this time with outrage. Clara screamed, lunging toward the laptop, but two neighbors restrained her. My son tried to speak, but the weight of evidence crushed him into silence. I looked around the room, at the faces of friends, family, neighbors, each one bearing witness to the unraveling of lies. I felt a swell of strength I thought I had lost forever. Family, I said, my voice trembling with emotion, is supposed to protect you, not destroy you. A house is bricks and wood, but dignity is flesh and blood. They tried to strip me of both. But today, you all see the truth. And tomorrow, justice will see it too. The applause that followed was not joyous but righteous, the sound of solidarity. For the first time in months, I was not alone. When the truth finally burst open in that parlor, I thought the storm had peaked. But storms have a way of spreading, sweeping across fields and towns, carrying debris in every direction. That is exactly what happened once the witnesses stepped forward. My private hell was no longer confined to the mansion. It had become a public scandal, impossible to contain. The butler's testimony had been the spark, but soon others found their voices. The gardener, a quiet man who had worked for us for 15 years, came to me the next morning. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, cap in hand, eyes lowered. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. I should have spoken sooner. I heard them in the greenhouse weeks ago. Miss Benson told your son that if you didn't move out, they would find a way to make it look natural. I didn't understand then, but now I know. Please forgive me for keeping silent. His words chilled me, but they also fortified my case. It wasn't just suspicion, it was conspiracy. Then came Mrs. Davenport, the neighbor who had seen Henry dragged to the courthouse. She visited with tears in her eyes, clutching my hand. I thought it wasn't my place to interfere, she confessed, but I remember the way he looked, Eleanor. So lost, so weak. He didn't belong there that day. I'll tell the police exactly what I saw. Word spread quickly. By evening, reporters were already gathering at the gate, their voices calling questions, cameras flashing as though the mansion itself were on trial. Headlines appeared in the local paper. Wealthy widow betrayed by son and caretaker. Another read, Mansion of Deceit, a family's dark secret unveiled. Clara tried to spin her version, of course. She called relatives privately, pleading that she had only wanted to help, that I was delusional, unwell. But her outburst in the parlor had been witnessed by too many. Her words, "You refuse to die quietly," spread through the community like wildfire. Even the church congregation, once sympathetic to Clara's performance of devotion, turned their backs. At Sunday service, whispers followed her down the aisle until finally the pastor himself approached me, assuring me that the community would rally behind me. "Truth always finds its way to the light," he said, his hand firm on mine. For the first time, I believed him. The police came next. Detectives entered the mansion, notebooks in hand, their presence both terrifying and liberating. They questioned staff, neighbors, even Henry, though his answers were confused. But when they reviewed the footage from the cameras, their expressions hardened. One detective, tall and stern, turned to me and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, this is more than enough to pursue charges." In that moment, I felt the house itself exhale, as though the walls had been waiting for justice just as much as I had. But the fire spread further still. Relatives who had once ignored me now called, their voices thick with shame and shock. Some offered apologies, others offered money for legal fees, and then came the most unexpected witness of all, a bank officer. He arrived with documents showing forged signatures on accounts, transactions Clara and my son had orchestrated. His conscience, he said, wouldn't allow him to stay silent any longer. Piece by piece, the puzzle built itself, each testimony another brick in the fortress of truth around me. The narrative that I was weak, fragile, unfit, it crumbled like dust under the weight of so many voices. I wasn't just a lonely wife fighting to reclaim her home anymore. I was a woman with an army, with witnesses whose courage amplified mine, with a community that had seen the rot exposed and refused to turn away. And yet, amid the growing chorus, One truth settled heavy in my heart. The betrayal of a caretaker was vile, but the betrayal of my son was unbearable. Every time a witness spoke, every time another lie was uncovered, his silence cut deeper. He did not defend me, he did not apologize, he did not fight for redemption. He simply let the fire consume him, sitting beside Clara as if shackled by his own guilt. But the fire was not done spreading. The police promised arrests would follow. The reporters promised headlines would grow larger. And I promised myself one thing. I would not stop until every secret was dragged screaming into the light. The day the arrests came, the mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a courtroom. Police cars lined the driveway, their red and blue lights flashing against the stone walls, while neighbors gathered at the gates, whispering and pointing. I stood at the top of the staircase, my hands gripping the banister, watching as officers led Clara away in handcuffs. Her face was twisted, half defiant, half terrified, the mask finally shattered. She tried to shout that she had been misunderstood, that she was only protecting the family, but her words were drowned out by the cameras clicking and the murmurs of outrage from the crowd outside. My son followed, pale and broken, his wrists bound in metal. He did not look at me, not once. Perhaps shame had finally reached him, or perhaps he still believed he was the victim of circumstance. Either way, the boy I had raised, the man who had betrayed me, disappeared into the back of a police car without a word. The staff who had once looked through me now avoided my gaze entirely, guilt etched into their faces. Some resigned quietly, others begged forgiveness, but I had no energy left for them. My focus was on Henry, who sat slumped in his chair, bewildered by the commotion. When I knelt beside him and took his hand, his cloudy eyes met mine for a flicker of recognition. "Eleanor?" he whispered. "I'm here," I said softly, though tears blurred my vision. "It's over. We're safe now." But safety was relative. The days that followed were a blur of court hearings, depositions, and endless questions from detectives and lawyers. Each time I repeated the story, each time I watched the footage, the wound reopened. But with each repetition, I felt stronger. I was no longer telling the story of a victim. I was bearing witness to the downfall of betrayal. The community reacted with fury. Clara became a pariah overnight, her name spat out in disgust. My son's betrayal was harder for people to process. Neighbors shook their heads, muttering that greed had poisoned him, that they could not imagine turning on their own mother. At church, people pressed my hands, whispered prayers, promised support. The whispers of pity that had once followed me were replaced with whispers of respect. The law moved swiftly. Fraud, coercion, conspiracy. The charges stacked against them like bricks in a prison wall. Their lawyers tried to argue diminished responsibility, financial stress, even compassion gone wrong, but the evidence was undeniable. The footage of Henry's trembling hand, the testimony of the butler and gardener, Clara's own shouted confession, it was more than enough. The judge's gavel fell with finality. Guilty. Clara sentenced to years in prison, my son facing the same. The mansion, my home, restored to me not by sentiment, but by justice. But victory tasted bitter. At night, when the house was quiet again, I walked through the halls and felt both triumph and sorrow. I had reclaimed my dignity, but I had lost a son. I had fought off the thief at my door, but the thief had been my own blood. That truth would never stop aching. Yet there was relief, too. The storm had passed. The shadows had lifted. I was no longer a ghost in my own house. I was the rightful mistress once more, scarred but unbroken. And though the community saw justice, only I knew the true cost. Betrayal had not destroyed me, but it had carved pieces of me away I would never get back. In the weeks after the trial, the mansion slowly began to breathe again. The air no longer carried whispers of conspiracy. The corridors no longer echoed with footsteps of betrayal. For the first time in months, I walked through each room without feeling like an intruder. The portraits on the walls seemed to look at me differently now, not with pity, but with recognition. I was home, truly home. Henry grew quieter as his health declined, but sometimes, in rare lucid moments, he would take my hand and whisper, "You were always stronger than I was," and I would smile through the tears, knowing he finally saw the truth I had fought so hard to prove. I tended to him with gentleness, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Betrayal had broken so much, but it had not broken my vow to stand beside him until the end. The community, once distant, rallied around me. Neighbors brought food, the church sent volunteers, even strangers wrote letters saying my fight had inspired them. They called me courageous, but I never felt like a hero. I had been cornered, humiliated, nearly erased, and I simply refused to vanish. If that was courage, then it was born from desperation. But I learned something vital. Dignity cannot be stolen by signatures or forged documents. It cannot be erased by gossip or manipulation. Dignity lives in the choice to stand when the world pushes you to your knees. It lives in the refusal to let lies become your legacy. One evening, I sat beneath the old oak tree in the garden, the very tree where Henry and I had pledged our love decades ago. The air was cool, the leaves whispered in the breeze, and for the first time in a long time I felt peace. The house loomed behind me, scarred but still standing, much like myself. I thought of my son then, of the boy he once was and the man he became. The wound of his betrayal will never fully heal. But I also thought of the truth. I survived him. I survived them. And survival itself is a form of victory. So now I tell you, whoever listens to this story, what would you do if the very people you loved most turned their knives on you? Would you surrender quietly, or would you rise and fight for your name, your home, your dignity? I chose to fight. And though the battle left scars, it also left me standing, stronger, clearer, unafraid. If my story has reached you, if it has made you question the faces around your own table, then let it also remind you of this. Truth always finds its voice, even if it must scream through the cracks of betrayal. And if you believe dignity is worth fighting for, then stand with me. Share my story. Leave your thoughts below. Because sometimes the act of speaking out is the only weapon we have left.